Welcome back to Empowering the Artist Within, the space for creativity, self-expression and personal growth. I'm Liz Ross and I'm here to inspire and uplift you through meaningful conversations and powerful affirmations. Today, I'm joined by a wonderful guest, a gentle, creative soul who supports artists, makers and creatives to grow in confidence and build a business they love. Jo McCarthy. With decades of experience in marketing, shop ownership, education, and living in many different countries, Jo brings a wealth of knowledge and insight. She describes herself as a gentle, creative guide, helping artists and makers find clarity, confidence, and joy in their creative journey. In this warm, uplifting conversation, Jo and I explore overcoming self-doubt, embracing imperfection, nurturing your creativity and building confidence as a creative. Together, we create a safe, creative space that will leave you feeling nourished, connected and uplifted. You'll begin to accept where you are, knowing that with compassion and gentle encouragement, you can build your confidence, overcome creative self-doubt and embrace your imperfections. You're in for a treat. So grab a cuppa, take a deep breath, and let's get started. Hi everyone, welcome. Today I am joined by the lovely Jo McCarthy. Jo describes herself as a gentle creative guide and she is based in Wales, and we first met in Alice Sheridan's Connected Artists Club, and I'm sure we will get into talking about that later. Jo's focus is in helping makers, artists and creatives to build clarity in their work and their business. Welcome, Jo.
Thank you, Liz. I'm so chuffed to be here. Yeah, I love listening to your podcast and I was really very touched when you asked me to be on it. So thank you.
Oh, thank you so much for being here. I was really excited when you said yes, because you're such a big part of our Connected Artists Club and you help so many of us in there, and a lot of people obviously who are in Connected Artists Club and who also aren't in Connected Artists Club outside of there. So I'm excited to get into kind of how you support creatives and how that all came about. So yeah, thank you so much for being here. It's very exciting to chat to you and have some time to get to know you a bit better.
Thank you.
So I really always love to start finding out a bit more about your creative journey and how you got started. So you've supported a lot of creatives kind of through transitions and self-doubt, and I was wondering what your creative journey has looked like.
Yeah, I found this question interesting because I'm not myself an artist. I was always a creative child. I was probably, like lots of your listeners, the child that was always making things, and my art supplies were my most precious possessions, and we always had paper everywhere, and that was definitely my childhood, and it was something that was encouraged. I did A-level art at school and completely flunked it.
Oh.
Yeah, it's a really long story, but I completely flunked it. I don't know that I was ever going to be a practicing artist. I don't know that that ever was what I wanted to do at that time, but I left school and became an estate agent, which I
Okay.
loved. I absolutely
Wow.
loved it. And it was in a lovely little town called Sandwich in Kent. And I think that's actually where I got a little taste of the sort of marketing and selling that I really enjoy doing now. And then I moved to London and the sort of creative itch was still there to be scratched. I definitely wasn't creating. I found London fantastic. I loved it, but I was getting a lot of my creative stimulation, I suppose, just from the environment. So I still wasn't doing anything particularly physical. And then I went to Goldsmiths College in London and I did a degree in English and history of art, and that definitely satisfied some of that kind of creative need. And then since then I sort of mainly worked in education settings in different schools, so always quite people based, and I think people are creative, so I feel like quite satisfied sort of in that. And then we ended up living in different countries including America. Then we came back to the UK and I set up a little shop. And that was my way, I suppose, of dipping my toe back into more creative is a broad term, isn't it? But sort of creative, I was taking photographs, I was working with makers, particularly ceramicists, and, just interesting people that I was finding. The shop was always very tiny. I ended up finding more satisfaction in talking to the makers about how to build their businesses than actually being a shopkeeper. I loved being a shopkeeper. It wasn't particularly profitable. I needed to put way more into it than I was able to do at that time. We had a lot of family difficulties going on. And so it just sort of, I had to prioritize. And I realized that actually running a business from my laptop and getting to talk to people was actually what I really loved doing. So I switched, and the joke is that I sort of taught people how to do what I wasn't very good at doing. She was running a shop.
I love that.
So it's kind of sometimes people say, well, how do you know how to do that? And I honestly, I don't want to sound flippant about it, but I did. It was a time, this was kind of 2019, and this online space, particularly the sort of Instagram space, allowed for these kinds of businesses to exist, and people were getting their advice from a huge variety of sources, and I've sort of become one of them for some people. So it feels like a real privilege. It's bringing in all these different experiences into what I'm doing now. So I'm not particularly making anything, but it is my greatest joy to work with those who are.
Yeah, I really love that. And it's so interesting how that came about, because I think there are, like you say, creative and creativity, it's a very broad term.
Yeah.
And I suppose the fact that you're working with creative people, but you have, just because you're not necessarily making things now, you have that curiosity about people that kind of are, and that's where
Yeah.
your sort of enjoyment is with working with
Yeah.
those people.
Yeah. And what I find, again, such a treat is that actually, when I say I'm not making anything, I'm dabbling. I'm just not doing it in any kind of big way. But, we all know that it's so good for us to do things with our hands. And that, the more I work with people who are really prioritizing that, the more I can see the benefits of it. So for me, it's coming out. We've renovated our place where we live, and it's coming out in other ways. And yeah, I'm kind of going to bed at night, sometimes dreaming of the paintings that I want to produce. And so I'm confident it's
Oh,
coming.
watch this
Watch
space.
this space. Don't
You're
watch
in
it
the
too
right place.
closely. I don't watch the space too closely. There
No,
won't be anything dramatic happening. But yeah, I think it's just always going to be a sort of a side effect of working with people who
definitely.
are, creating.
And you know what, like you said, don't watch this space. But I think that's the thing that is really important to me, and why I wanted to start the podcast, and why I'm trying to show my process and the way things are for me. Because as you said, there are so many benefits to creating,
Yeah,
and it's so important for our mental health, for our well-being.
yeah,
And I think there's still that perception that it has to look and be a certain way before it can be shown.
yeah.
And I'm trying to change that
Mm,
for as many people as I can, to help them feel that the imperfection is
mm,
okay,
hmm.
because it doesn't have to be beautiful. It doesn't have to be something that we feel, looks a certain way, or
Yeah.
it has to be perfect in order to show it.
Hmm.
Because actually, if you're creating truly and authentically, it might be awful. And that's okay, because you don't know
Yeah,
what wants to come out. And if you
yeah,
allow it to be really intuitive,
yeah,
then it is just going to be whatever it is. I
yeah.
think it's okay to be okay with that and to show that. And I think it's really
Yeah.
important.
I went on a deep dive yesterday on something called the Looking Glass Self. I don't know if you've heard of it, but
Ooh.
it's really interesting. It was developed by someone called Charles Horton Cooley in 1902. And I found it so interesting because it's basically how our sense of self develops through
Yeah.
other people's perceptions, so how other people view us. And of course, we live in an age where we're sharing a lot of what we do on platforms like Instagram, social media. And
Mm.
it's this idea, that it can really, really make us quite depressed, actually, and quite suppressed,
Yeah.
because, like you say, we feel like things have to sort of meet a standard. Your classic case in social media terms about this is the kind of, when people say, oh, it's not Instagram worthy, or it's like our spaces. Like right now, this space looks okay, but who knows what's going on
Yeah,
out of shot.
absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And
exactly.
it's this kind of idea that sometimes it's this imaginary view that we think people have of us, and that can really be a big prevention to developing creativity. And I definitely feel some of that pressure, and Rick Rubin's talks about that creative gap, where it's kind of
Yeah.
what you want to create and what you do create, and that frustration that exists and that tension that exists in that gap. And that's something that I feel like I'm in that gap. So although I'm not at the moment doing anything particular, these are the things that are on my mind about my own creativity.
It's so interesting that you share that, because I think a lot of people can relate to that. And I certainly can relate to that. And I am creating, I am
Mm,
painting and I'm
mhm,
doing a lot of digital work, but
mm.
I definitely have this kind of view of the work that I want to be creating.
Yeah.
And it's like getting there and putting the practice in and feeling okay with the messy middle. And
Yeah.
I know a lot of people are talking about that at the moment. And
Yeah.
it's also being okay. I mean, look, you don't have to share it, but I
Mm,
feel that when you do, it almost gives permission for other
yeah.
people to either do it or share it
Mm,
and know that
yeah.
it's okay. Because a lot of
Yeah.
people just, they don't even want to get started because they're so, firstly, they're so
Mm,
scared, but secondly,
mm,
that they think, well, it's never going to look like that person's
mm,
or the
mhm,
people that I am seeing on social media. And that
mm.
would never have been an issue because we didn't have so much exposure to what everyone else was doing.
Yeah, yeah. And this is the climate that artists are working in now, which I think is worth consideration, that if this is feeling like something you can relate to, don't forget you're working against this backdrop where it's kind of, we've got these tools at our disposal, we feel like we should use them. I work with clients and say it's suddenly you're sort of meant to be a marketing expert, sales whiz, you're meant to know how to make videos, you do your podcast, like, you've had to learn how to do these
Yeah,
things. So like there's an awful lot of pressure to do things well, the standards and the sort of, we're living at a time when you can pretty much learn how to do anything. And
yeah.
so people are left thinking almost like a sense of shame that they haven't. So yeah, it's a really interesting one, I think, to look at your own, where you sit on that scale.
Yeah, definitely. And I think also, not only do people think, is there any point in me even starting?
Mm,
Because there's so many other
mm,
people doing it and they're doing it so well, what's the
yeah,
point in it for me?
yeah,
And I guess kind of that's why it took me about 8 years to start the podcast,
yeah.
probably for that reason. But
Mm,
then when I took all that away and I thought to myself,
mm,
well, I just want to start it and I'm
mm,
just going to start it however I can. And
mm,
actually, that then gives other people permission to do the same. And I think that's really important now with,
mm,
like you say, people being on this, whatever you want to call it, balance between,
mhm,
where they want to be and
mm,
where they're seeing maybe other people and thinking they can't
mm,
get there. I think
mhm,
just seeing and hearing from other people that are doing it and just showing up imperfectly does really help you to be like,
mm,
okay, I'm just going to start. And then it doesn't
mm.
actually matter because once I get started, then I can continue and improve.
Yeah,
And I
yeah.
think that kind of gentle approach is what I absolutely love about you and what you share and the way that you and Alice work together in Connected Artists Club. I mean, it's so refreshing because there's so many people telling you to do it a certain way. You should do it this way, you should do it that way. And then you and Alice come along and everything is very much, this is the way I'm doing it and it's working for me. So let's just
Yeah.
go with it, and I love that so much.
Mm. Yeah, it kind of is interesting. Yeah, it sprung. So yeah, if I go back to when we left the States and I sort of decided to have this change of
Yeah, a big
job
change.
and career and direction, I consumed like an absolute madwoman. I mean, I was just constantly reading, listening, absorbing. I was like this absolutely full sponge of information, and it was useful, but I very quickly realized that I had to wring some of it out. Otherwise, I'd just be at this kind of impasse all the time. And you can kind of outsource your decision making quite quickly when you
Yes.
try and learn like that. And I realized that I was lacking confidence about my next steps because I was constantly checking, with, oh, well, what's that expert saying this week in her podcast? I can't possibly make a decision until I've heard her. you know
Yeah.
and it's all with the greatest respect towards these people, but I realized for me it makes more sense to me to go about things in a less prescriptive way and to allow for plenty of nuance and discussion and for several things to be true at once. I found this very sort of almost like dictatorial approach that some in this space take to be
Yeah.
unhelpful. I prefer, and Alice does too, to kind of just look at things in many dimensions. And that, of course, takes time. And that's perhaps where the more gentle approach is useful. I myself was spending £11 here, £27 here, £39 here on courses and downloads and PDFs. And really, I had a
Oh,
checklist for that. And then you think,
I hear
yeah, it's
you.
yeah, my downloads folder. I mean, honestly, and I know that there's many listening to this who will relate. I mean, that's often how we almost kind of build an appetite in the first place to enjoy this marketing, sales, world that I'm in. However, it definitely reached a point. I worked with a really fantastic woman called Elaine. She said something that will always stick with me, which was, so much advice is kind of like sticking a carrot on top of the soil. And so for an outsider looking on, they think, wow, you've grown that. That's amazing. Well done. You must really know what you're doing. It's completely rootless. And so it's so much better to start from the soil. I use gardening analogies because it just makes so much sense, right? It's like
Yeah.
the sort of the soil, know your soil conditions too. Like, what is your capacity? What's your family environment, who's supporting you in this world, where are your challenges going to be? All of those things come into it. And so that's how, over the years, I've been doing this for a few years now, and over the years, that's kind of the approach that I have found to be most helpful for people, particularly if they are, when I work with somebody one-to-one, they haven't landed from planet Zog. They've got often complex lives and a wealth of experience, decades sometimes of experience. So having a checklist that kind of says how to do something might get you over a hump. It might even get you started on something. But I have found it needs to be a little more, nuanced, a bit deeper than that.
It's almost like a holistic approach, really, isn't it?
It has to be, doesn't it? Because
Yeah.
we are, we are complex people, and as we've mentioned, social media, other spaces provide us with a huge amount of information to absorb, and that's going to affect all of our systems. And then our self-judgment kicks in, the fear of what people in our real lives are going to think. We've got these online personalities, it is complex. So the conversations have to be a little more, I'm not saying they're always super deep, sometimes it is, how do I price my paintings? Like, that doesn't have to be the deepest of conversations, but
Yeah.
if you ask that question, you are bringing with you a whole heap of other experiences that will inform your decision.
Yeah, I think that's really a good point to be thinking about, because even like you say, something as simple as how do I price my paintings? You think like, okay, well, give me a formula and we'll work it out. Actually, as you
Mm.
say, there can be so many things around that, even just that one tiny thing, and where you are, what's happening in your family, like just all sorts of things to
Yeah,
consider.
all sorts of things. Having a formula is fantastic as a starting point, as something to hold on to and to kind of, almost like the seed that you're sort of planting. But yeah, probably with experience, other factors are going to influence that. I worked with a client once and she didn't particularly want to sell her work. So her prices were really high, because she
Right.
didn't particularly want
Fair
to.
enough.
Yeah, so there's a lot to it that is very dependent on you and your circumstances. Yeah.
Definitely. So when you're working with people individually,
Mm.
aside from within Connected Artists Club, it sounds like you take a really full view on what is happening for those people, and not just, what if they come to you with a problem, for example, you wouldn't just look at that, you'd be
Mm.
going deeper. Like, I love your analogy of the soil and kind
Mm.
of building up, because it
Yeah.
just feels really nourishing, even though it's
Yeah,
our word of the month at the moment.
yeah, word of the month,
Connected
be
Artists
connected.
Club.
Yeah, it is nourishing. I am nourished
I
by,
love
I
that.
am blown away by the people I get to work with. Honestly, like sometimes after a call, I kind of have to, decompress because I am blown away. I have the greatest respect for the people I work with. It's so interesting working on a one-to-one basis because I am not an expert. I am not I don't ever overpromise what these calls will do for you, but it is a real privilege to draw people out and to just give people the space. I've enjoyed it when I've been on the receiving end of that, and having that opportunity to carve out some time that is just dedicated to you. I think that's the biggest treat in the whole world, isn't it? Just
Absolutely.
to, yeah, and then I hope anyway to just meet you where you are.
Yeah.
I'm confidential about it. I don't, unless somebody themselves shares that we're working together, I won't mention it. That's important to me to maintain that confidentiality. People sometimes come a little embarrassed almost about what they don't know, going back to what we were saying.
Yeah.
Oh, I know I should know more. I've been doing this for years, and it's why on earth should you? So sometimes there's a little bit of nervousness about opening up. And it's interesting too that one thing I've just started to develop, it's kind of underway, is not doing face-to-face one-to-one work, but doing it over emails. So I've had a couple of clients in a kind of beta testing approach, and one of them, she said she feels like she's got much more out of it than a face-to-face because she can really
Okay.
think about her responses. It's over the course of a month, and so it is gentle. There is literally the pressure is very limited. You respond when you feel you can and you want to. So that's been really interesting to see that, yeah, this noise that we've discussed, and this kind of bombardment, I've enjoyed finding ways of almost going down the side street, off the high street, off the main street, and kind
Yeah.
of, oh, let's just go and sit on the side street somewhere and have a quieter moment. I'm actually, as a person, I'm quite noisy and I'm quite boisterous. I was telling someone recently that at school I was thrown out of class for being disruptive and, perhaps
Never.
undiagnosed for a few things. It's interesting to me that, again, that kind of two things can be true at once thing.
Yes.
Actually, I've got that kind of a personality, but actually in this kind of a work, it's almost like a little switch goes off in me where everything just softens, and it does become, yeah, just a little more of a sort of chilled out space, to
Yeah.
discuss. Yeah. It doesn't mean we don't have frameworks. It doesn't mean we don't have structure. Someone once said, oh, is it just chatting? There is a purpose to it, but actually it's better if you come up with what that is, and my job is to kind of nudge you there and get you there. And yeah, almost like giving you the tools, like with the gardening. It's actually, a fork in this instance will be better than a spade, and this is why. That's kind
Yeah.
of my job.
I love your analogy. And
The
you're,
irony is, Liz, I'm looking
yeah.
down onto my garden, which is literally, it looks like things have exploded in it. I mean, it's
And your newsletter's called The Garden Shed.
it is called the Garden Shed, yeah. So I developed
I
all of
love it.
this. Again, my shop was quite sort of, the branding was all quite organic. I'm moving to Wales. I've mostly in my life lived in towns and cities, and then moving to North Wales, anyone that's been here will know it's quite a sort of, in some ways, it's quite an aggressive landscape. It's like lots of greys and mountains, and the sea is often choppy. I really wanted to kind of bring that into my work a little bit, and so looking to the land made a lot of
Yeah.
sense. Yeah.
And it all fits really nicely. And earlier you were saying you feel like you're not an expert particularly, you don't want to say,
No.
that, what have you. But I think that I don't even think that's necessarily important anymore, that we feel
Mm-hmm.
that way and we feel guilty about not having X, Y, or Z training,
Mm-hmm.
because it is so much about what you bring and about the approach. And as you mentioned, having that space for people, that is probably one of the most important gifts that you can give somebody, that they have time to speak to you and you can reflect back what they're feeling or going through or what they need. And you don't need to be an expert in that. You just have to be a certain type of person, which
Mm-hmm.
you obviously are. And that enables you to give people that space and that time. And therefore, you can kind of guide them, as you said, really gently in the way that they need. And you are very, very good. So don't downplay your skills because you are very good. You've got a really lovely way about you. And when you are explaining the marketing side of it, it doesn't feel marketing. It just feels very gentle and very natural and makes us feel like, oh, I can do that. Because actually, often it's like, let's just take one thing, we just change,
Yeah.
like for example, SEO. You mention SEO, people shut down, but
Yeah.
you'll say something like, it's really important on your website to make sure your name, your full name, is on the page however many times you can get it in. And that's SEO, but actually, just you saying it like that as well, I can do that. I can
Yeah.
definitely go
Yeah.
to one page and try and fit my name in somehow,
Yeah.
and it's like that's one change that wouldn't take very long, that would have a big impact, but you've not sat down and go, right, let's discuss SEO.
Yeah. And there are, believe me, I have learned all of this from people who do sit down and say, right,
Yeah,
SEO
yeah.
is my specialism. I
You've
think
done it, so
my
we don't have to.
Yeah, I think, I am a magpie, like a lot of people, no doubt, listening to this, where your influences are varied and there's always something that's kind of piquing my interest. And at times in the past, it has been how to use Instagram, and I'm kind of not on that train anymore, but email marketing or something has really gripped me and I'm really
Yeah,
fascinated by it. At the moment, it's biopsychology. I just can't talk enough about it. Just interesting how we're influenced, for example, about how we buy and how we shop and how we curate our homes. Like those types of topics are really interesting me. So I think this is where I feel extremely privileged, is that I get to put these findings and these snippets of information that I absorb, I get to put them somewhere by working in Connected Artists. So when
yeah,
Alice first met me, I guess online, I was doing much more e-commerce training. So particularly because of my own shop experience, I was mainly helping people to literally get a website and design it and put their products in. And it was all the sort of
yeah,
nitty gritty of setting up a shop. So when I came into the Connected Artist membership, we had a section called Shop Success, and it was
yeah,
very much around selling and marketing and product photography and descriptions and the SEO and that kind of thing. And then it's just sort of expanded, I think, in the membership, what I talk about. But in my client calls, it might still be that, it might still be an e-commerce sort of leaning, because might be what someone remembers me from years ago doing. So yeah, I sometimes can't believe I get to do this, It really is a treat. And for however long it lasts,
yeah.
I do
Gosh,
really love
no,
it.
that's so
Yeah.
lovely. And I love that people can kind of come to you with wherever they're at, and you can kind
Yeah, it
of
makes it difficult to market myself, I'll be
yeah,
honest, because it's like the Instagram bio, isn't it? The dilemma of what the heck to put. We've got 150
yeah,
characters, I think, and I do like a good emoji. So like that reduces the number. And it's like,
yeah.
how do you summarize? It's like an artist, isn't it? Like how on
So
earth do you
hard.
summarize what you do? And I feel like we do live in a world where we like these kind of very pithy ways of describing each other. So yeah, that was my Instagram is actually private. I made that decision too. And partly it was because I was just getting a bit kind of I just want to use it in my own way. This sort
Mm.
of slight disruptor in me. I was just kind of, yeah, thinking actually I don't want to have to constantly be optimizing and defining and coming up with these kind of hooks and bite-sized things. I've just opted out a bit at the moment. Whether that will change, I don't know. It is hard to define this kind of work, I think. Probably a marketing expert would have some ideas for me, which I'm open to. But for now, I think the people that do find me and do connect with what I offer are themselves probably quite broad thinking and quite nuanced in their
Yeah.
thinking.
So it's really interesting then that if you at the moment and I know sometimes you take time off, you delete the app, the
Yeah.
Instagram app. So if you're using Instagram privately and you're not sending, as you said, you only sent you've sent a couple of emails this year.
Yeah.
How are you marketing yourself and how
Yeah.
are people
Yeah.
finding you? Because I think people would really love to know that, because I know
Yeah.
you get so, like, I just want to say, fed up with social media and having to market
Yeah.
yourself.
Yeah.
So
It's a great question. I think this is something I should probably write about somewhere. That,
definitely.
yeah, I feel like what happened with me is that I had a few clients, long-term clients, who between them all kind of filled up my week. So my week was quite full. And then a few of them ended kind of around the same time. particularly one photographer who's a really close friend of mine because we worked together for years. We came to this mutual decision that it was time to switch things up. And it kind of created this gap. And I realized that actually, yeah, I had dropped a lot of marketing efforts, and life was happening too. I've shared that my mum isn't well with terminal cancer. So I was actually quite happy for things to be a little bit loose. But it is interesting when I talk a lot about this baggy planning idea, but it was almost like the emphasis was too much on baggy. And my marketing momentum had definitely, like when a ball is kind of just about to stop moving, I think that's where I was. And so I'm still in the process probably of reflecting on that and kind of making a plan. People find me despite that, and however, it is a noisier space out there, definitely, in this kind of a world. I was talking to someone I've worked with for a long time, and we set up our businesses at a similar time, around sort of between 2017 and 2019. We were saying how different it is now, and Instagram as a tool, I think, is still extremely useful for many people. The community, chatting, feeling like you can post something and there's like a reliable group of people that will comment on it. I think that has changed, and my own behavior has changed in that. So yeah, how people are finding me, probably, I mean, Connected Artist has definitely brought me into a different audience for sure. But yeah, probably it's recommendations from other people, I would say, because not everyone I work with is an artist. Many are doing other things. But yeah, probably recommendations at the moment is how people are finding me.
Okay.
That was a long answer to a simple question.
No, it was a really helpful answer, actually, because actually that highlights exactly what we're talking about. The fact that, it might be like a simple question that somebody comes with, but actually, when you consider everything else that's going on, that then helps to decide how you're going to move forward. And so it's useful for people to hear that.
I find it really interesting that it's marketing, for example, is really complex. And my sort of version of it is probably quite a simple version, and particularly when it's just me, I am my business. So there's certain things that I've never ventured into for my own marketing. So I haven't ever gone into paid advertising, Facebook ads, that kind of thing. It's always been organic. But I think the climate that we're working in is just really different, and the demands on people are different. And also, I think there's a shift that I am probably myself participating in, which is getting offline. These kinds of mechanisms in place for marketing oneself online have shifted dramatically in the last few years. And so even sending emails, for example, even the data that you might collect around that has changed. The way people's email providers open their emails has changed. So there's lots and lots of factors to consider. So being hard on ourselves and thinking, it's just not as easy as it used to be. No, it isn't, and I think it's important to notice and then to navigate that, and that's what I'm trying to do at the moment. And getting out of the house more and being in the real world and talking about your work with people in the real world. I mean, that is important for artists as well. I think that's almost like a lost skill because of the reliance on online tools.
That's actually been quite a huge part of my strategy this year. I have been going to a lot of networking groups, which has been it's been really eye-opening. It was really hard for me because I'm actually I'm quite a quiet person. Like you were saying that your personality seems different to how you are. I think a lot of people say the same about me. Like people will constantly, you're so confident and, I love what you're doing. And obviously the fact that I'm putting them on YouTube, but that is not me. That is just me trying. I am completely open about that. I'm very shy, very quiet, and I'm very nervous in a room full of people. So going into, and a lot of people can relate to that, most people would go into a networking group and feel uncomfortable, or they might not go. So that's been something that I've worked quite hard on this year. And actually the networking group that I go to allows you to display your work, whatever business you have. And that's been a real good moneymaker for me because I've actually done display slots at the networking meetings, met new people, and also I've sold my work, like my prints. So, it's been a good price point. I'm not talking about trying to sell something for hundreds of pounds at a networking meeting, but, that's been really fantastic. And like you say, I'm getting out there, I'm meeting
Mm.
people locally, I'm showing them what I do. And I think online is amazing, and we're so lucky, and connecting with people all over the world and having conversations like these and reaching people all over the world is incredible. And we can learn so much and get so much support. And something like in Connected Artists Club, where you've got artists from all over the world, it can be so supportive, because you can actually really get encouragement and motivation that what you're doing
Yeah.
is, you know, you can do it and you can move forward.
Yeah.
But like you say, getting out there into the local environment, meeting people. I've been to local galleries, and I've got the local framer that I use, and building those connections is
Mhm.
also incredibly important. And I think really good to highlight that, you know, when it comes to marketing ourselves in the local community is one of the best ways that we can do it. And it can also be a strategy that is different and maybe possibly more rewarding than something like Instagram, Facebook, and those kind of
Mm.
things. So I'm really glad that you brought that up, because I think that's one that's definitely not really talked about a lot. And it is something that people could consider. The other thing as well, I was thinking about when you were talking about that, is that there are obviously people do Facebook ads and all these things to bring people, but you kind of almost have to be ready for that. Because I remember when I had Alice Sheridan on and we were chatting about Connected Artists Club, she was opening the membership. So
Mhm.
we were discussing that. And she was saying, you know, she doesn't do ads or anything to get people into the membership. And often that's because of the way that she does her launches have become, you know, quite quiet and gentle. And it's because she wants to keep it at a certain level of people where she know, you know, she knows so many of us, most of us, she, you know, she'll have a conversation, she knows what's going on for that person, and she doesn't want that to change. And that's a
Mm.
conscious decision. So like you're saying with Instagram, that's a conscious decision. Some people will decide, I don't want to do ads, because that potentially is going to send me so many people and open it up. So if
Mm.
your working week is already full,
Mm.
there's no need to make it fuller, you know, because then
Mm.
you're going to be overstretched with people. So that's a consideration as well of how you want to run your business and what your business you want it to look like.
That's the point, isn't it?
Yeah,
What do you want? So for me, it makes absolutely no sense that I do one-to-one, really. Like
yeah, yeah,
financially, energetically,
absolutely.
I mean, it's like there's a ceiling, right? Everybody knows that. So then other questions come in, don't they? Which is, yeah, but what do you want the experience to be, and how close contact do you want, and that kind of thing. So this is what I think we both find extraordinary about Connected, is that it's a very, I've described it somewhere as like everyone rolls up their sleeves. It's a very dynamic, supportive, and involved. People are involved in the
Yeah,
membership.
yeah,
And Alice obviously is at the helm and guides in such a beautiful and very capable way.
yeah,
I've been in other memberships and you don't really see the facilitator. And I think
absolutely.
that's a huge distinction with Connected
Yes,
Artists. And I think that's one thing that attracts me to it. And just the quality, we talked right at the beginning about this idea that we're sponges and we have to kind of wring ourselves out. And I think what remains, hopefully, is high quality information and road tested advice. This isn't hypothetical. These are things that people have experienced and tried, and will they work again? Possibly not. That's up to you to kind of work out. I often will describe it as quite a mature space, in the sense of, yeah, it's not, I don't ever feel like it's kind of one dimensional. I feel like mature in the sense that it's developed and broad in its, again, it's a hard thing to describe. It's broad
yeah,
in its scope, and people will be it like with my work probably too, like this, there might be something that I say, or that Alice mentions in the membership, that is the thing that will attract you to it. But there might also be lots and lots of other things that sort of keep you there. So yeah, I feel like Connected is an extraordinary space, and is a real kind of launch pad too for lots of other things going on. I mean, probably you would agree with the podcast. It's given you
oh,
perhaps the
absolutely,
confidence, yeah, to know that there's
100%.
this group of people that we are literally cheering you on all the time,
Oh,
and we're really proud of you, and that's yeah. There is something I was watching recently with Brené Brown, and she was talking about what pulls people together. And there's lots of different communities out there that people belong to, but usually it is that sense of some sort of purpose, isn't it? And if the most simple way of describing communities like connected artists are that we support each other's creativity, if that's the very most basic way of describing it, then how wonderful is that?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
I mean, I love that so much. And I think that's why you're such a good fit for us and for working with creative people, because you just want to see people do well. And I think that is it's just key. It really is.
I was thinking the other day that I was working with a client, actually it was in the sort of pen pal work that I've been doing, and these are her words, she was saying that she's a chronic overthinker, nothing is ever
Relate to that.
Yeah. And so, there's a million strategies out there, right, for kind of just Google overcoming overthinking, right? And you'll be there for the next year.
Hours.
Reading it all, yeah.
Yeah.
Forever and ever and ever.
Yeah.
And so we had a bit of a laugh about how actually just build that into your process. Just build it in. It's going to happen. Take yourself off somewhere really nice to do it. Get some snacks.
That. Whoever tells you it's okay? No one
build
does.
it in. Yeah, build it in. You kind of know that if you need to make a decision, for example, it might take you longer than, whoever the average person is. But, yeah. And I find that is like a really interesting approach of like, in this work is just being a lot more accepting about who you are. So some of the language that I find around particularly this kind of mentoring, coaching type, I never know what to call myself, a guide, but I find a lot of the language is very much like 10 mistakes you're making, or 3 things I would tell you to do right now. And they're fantastic. Often they're very useful things to read, but actually it's setting you up to just think that you're not doing something right. And I think a lot of what we're doing, it's not life or death. It really isn't. There's a lot of play and fun and enjoyment and experimentation and trying things. I work with Jane Emerson, who's a fantastic textile artist, designer, long history in this world. She is so inspiring, and she has this lovely phrase, explode the what ifs. And it's this idea that here's someone that's been in a creative field for many years and she's still excited about what might happen, and I love that energy. And then so that's, I think, a lovely lens to look at a lot of this advice through is, actually, what side of me is it appealing to? Is it appealing to my lack of confidence and insecurity and all the sort of negatives? Or is it actually inspiring me just to, this is our one precious life, right? So like, is it inspiring me to use what I've got right now in a creative way? And that depends on so many things, so many factors. I'm experiencing that myself, right? With not necessarily picking up a paintbrush right now. So there's lots of different ways it can come out. But that's something that I try and avoid, is to not make people feel like they're somehow failing. It's like, what imaginary test is out there? Really, it's like, why are we putting where have these sort of like standards come from?
And then I feel like that's what we're trying to do, just break those barriers down and just say, like you said, be accepting of yourself. Like, I love that so much. Like, I am a chronic overthinker as well. I remember being on one of the calls in Connected Artist and Alice saying my name, and I was like, what, have I got to speak now? Then proceeded to have a conversation, which was absolutely fine, and then spent the whole day overthinking what I'd said. It was, because, oh my God, I took up space on that call, I spoke, and other people should have been speaking, and was it interesting? All these things. I'm like, oh my goodness.
It's fascinating, isn't it? Like having a sort of reasonable sense of yourself, right? So do I want to continue learning, experiencing, trying, all the doing work? Yes, it's an ongoing process, but have I also learned, experienced, have I also got those things under my belt? Yes, I do. So it's kind of having that sense of, you're kind of, it's ongoing, but also reflecting back and thinking, like, for example, some of the clients I work with have had really sometimes quite involved careers before they perhaps change to having a more creative pursuit, like being an artist or a ceramicist or photographer or
Mm.
something. And so one of the exercises I sometimes do with them is to kind of refresh their CVs, and not necessarily in terms of their actual jobs, but just all their different skills, and the soft skills and the all the things that you learn. Anyone that's a mother or run a home or is a caregiver or has lived in another place or anything like that. You're bringing all of these different sort of flavors to what you're doing. And I think sometimes, yeah, you can open an app like Instagram and almost forget all of that, because you don't know how to write a hook for
Yeah.
your reel. It's like, no,
Yeah.
don't know how to write a hook for my reel, but I can learn that.
Yeah, and then all of a sudden you feel like a failure, and then that's it.
And
It's
then you
down
don't write the
that
hook.
spiral. You don't write
And
the
then
book.
you
You
don't
don't
make
write
reels. Yeah.
anything.
Yeah.
You don't make anything. You don't write
Yeah.
anything, and nobody knows
Yeah.
anything about you.
Yeah, and it's
Yeah.
interesting because I definitely experienced that myself. This isn't like I've got all the answers, but these are the kinds of conversations I get to have, which is for me great. I love
Amazing.
it.
And that's
Yeah.
what I love about doing this and having the podcast.
Yeah, the podcast is a great opportunity,
It's
isn't it?
yeah,
Yeah,
it's just people are so interesting and I love finding out
yeah,
more about them. And I just
yeah,
think
yeah.
it helps
Mm.
move us all forward. So having
Yeah,
a conversation is
yeah.
such a treat.
Yeah, and that mention of the word forward is quite interesting because again, I think that comes into this idea of what is it that you're even aiming for? It might not be even something at the moment that's very tangible. And that's where again, kind of knowing yourself, something I'm trying to learn to do is like work more with my cycles, with the seasons, with the people around me, with their capacity as well, like being respectful of other people's capacity to hold space for me. Those kinds of things are like this, it all comes into it, doesn't it? When we're trying to think about what we're developing, we're not as independent as we might first think.
And that is something that I wanted to talk about, actually, the season thing, because
Mm,
when I first came into Connected Artists Club, that was the first I'd really heard of it or thought about it. And I find it really helpful because it gives you an understanding of yourself, and
mhm,
that kind of takes away the guilt and the shame of like you're not doing enough or you should be painting every day. Actually, when you start to consider your patterns in terms of whether it's what time you're most productive in the day or when you're most feeling energetic, when we were talking about it before we came on about how at this time of the year you feel like a bit more like decluttering. It's you might want to stay inside a little bit more and it's like warm and
mhm.
cozy, and whereas some people that's spring because they want a bit of a spring clean and it's a fresh time. So
Yeah.
taking into consideration your seasons and how that affects you and the way you work, and then like you said, the broader picture of everyone around you,
Mm,
it's a really helpful approach, and it's not something that I had ever considered or even really knew
yeah.
about before.
Yeah. Have you changed the way you work because of that, do you think?
Yes, I definitely have. I feel since I became aware of even the fact that people consider seasons and how they work within them, it's definitely had effect on the way I work. So I really consider now when I like to work. So for
Mhm,
example, like during my working day, I know I'm more productive in the morning. So I will always have that's a consideration then for what work I put in when. So I don't mind maybe painting in the evening because it's more relaxing. Whereas if I'm doing, say, podcast editing or writing my description and my notes and things like that, that's something that I would put in the morning because I know
mhm.
that I'll probably get it done a bit quicker because I'm got more energy.
Yeah.
So I think being aware of the times that I work best, and also seasons in terms of things like when it's winter and it's darker, I find it harder to paint because I can't really see, the natural light is obviously, even today, like it's so dull in here.
Mhm,
So painting or getting outside and painting definitely happens more for me, like in the summer, the spring,
mm,
whereas I don't mind being inside at this time of the year. So maybe like I'll spend a bit more time on my website or
mm,
thinking about setting up an email sequence, which I haven't really done, so
yeah.
those sort of tasks. And I think it really helps to consider that,
Mm,
because then you can give yourself a little bit more. understanding and not be so
Yeah.
hard on yourself. So for me now, I feel like I want to sort my prints out on my website because it's coming up to Christmas and that's like a really good time. And
Mm-hmm.
actually, if it came to like summertime, I wouldn't really want to be doing that. It's warm and maybe I want to be outside, or it's too hot to be in this room, that kind of thing. So I think having that way of thinking about things can be
Mm.
really helpful in structuring your year, your months, your weeks, and considering kind of how you work. It's
Yeah.
definitely something that's become a part of my practice that I never
Yeah,
even
amazing.
considered before.
And this is where, for me, this sort of baggy planning idea came from, because we've lived in places, my husband and I, where you haven't had 4 seasons. We've lived in the tropics, and you haven't got those kind of distinctive 4 seasons like we have in this part of the world. And I have realized in the different places we've lived that it's just simply about paying attention to how your body is responding, to what's going on. So, for example, we lived for a short time in the Caribbean, and it was very
Wow.
hot. And so most people would do their exercise early in the morning. Well, trying to get us to do that here in North Wales,
Yeah,
particularly at this time of year where it's dark and gloomy. So it's just being loose about things. And it sounds a bit obvious, but actually it is about just being in tune with yourself, with your environment, with your age, and kind of what your body is needing from you, and your influences, how people around you like to spend their time. So, for example, I was working with someone the other day who is actually, because winter is tricky for her emotionally and physically, she's actually going out during the day and doing fun things, and then allowing herself to do her work in the evening times. I thought that's a really practical solution for her. Not everybody will have that flexibility or be able to have that kind of a schedule, but in her circumstances, her baggy plan can include that for now. And then the
yeah,
season will change and she can adjust and change. So it's again not kind of thinking, right, that's the way to do it, and getting locked into a mindset. It's actually just being a lot more responsive, and responsible as well,
yeah.
like taking responsibility for how you need to operate.
And I think that having access to
Mm,
different people and a variety of people and that support and motivation, but also
mm.
seeing other people put things like that into practice
Yeah,
is so
yeah.
helpful
It
because,
is, isn't it? Especially in this
yeah,
part of the world, I feel like, because I mean, I've actually myself sort of struggled with this over the years, where particularly coming from working in schools where it's very much about who's the first in, who's the last out.
yeah,
Presenteeism is a problem there, and sort of shaking that up a bit. And kind of, I remember working with a client who is neurodiverse and could actually accomplish what would take me probably 8 hours, he's able to accomplish in, honestly, like an hour, 2 hours. And then it was acknowledging that actually, you know what, if you've met your responsibilities, no one's waiting on anything, you've done what you said you do, you feel like you don't have to sit on your chair for the
yeah,
rest of the day. That is, in this part of the world, I think that is mind-blowing for some
yeah,
people, and that conventional Monday to Friday, the weekends are the break that you might give yourself. That, I think, I mean, it's a whole nother topic, but that I
yeah,
think is fascinating. And the creative industries and creative people are often pioneering different ways of working, which is something that I find really great to look at, and for them to model what is possible, and that sort of conventionality being turned on its head a little bit.
yeah. It's so fascinating. And I
Mm,
think without these conversations and without places like Connected Artists Club memberships,
yeah.
you're not even open to any of those things. And
No.
like you say, you go into school, you sit for the whole
Yeah.
day, you go into the workplace, you work, and it's
Hmm.
structured. And so it's
Yeah.
not a surprise that then,
Mm,
if we do take these other avenues in our businesses,
mm,
it is almost a bit of like, I came into Connected Artists Club because I was completely procrastinating. I knew I wanted to take the artist side of things into a business, but I had no idea how. A lot of people
yeah.
come in for that reason.
Yeah. Hmm.
And obviously, Alice has the artist pass, which I knew
Hmm.
would give me that structure that I needed to get started. But actually, what I didn't realize was that, I mean, that's like the tiniest part of what I've taken from it. I mean, it's ultra helpful. It's been incredible. And it was great at the start because I needed that structure. And it's lovely to go back and kind of, if you are in a position where you're like, oh, what should I do next? There's
Yeah.
always that to guide you. But more than that, like you say, to be open to all these people who
Yeah.
are creating businesses and lives in a completely different way,
Yeah.
knowing that that's okay, knowing
Yeah.
possible,
Yeah.
seeing different ways of even being able to kind of
Yeah.
live and have a business and consider different things and work in different ways. All of a sudden, it's like, wow.
Yeah, it really is. I can remember when I was an estate agent, which like I said, I loved it. And I remember we were selling a beautiful cottage that belonged to an illustrator. And she was a single parent and worked hard on every level of her life. She was a really dynamic person. And I remember going into what was her studio. It was the most beautiful space and it was hers. It was one of the few spaces that was really just hers and for her. And I can distinctly remember going back to the office and it was all a bit dull and grey, and I think we treated ourselves to cheese twist for lunch or something. It was all just very, it was just like just very sort of normal. And I remember sort of daydreaming a bit about this artist and just thinking how magical it all seemed. So even though her life in many ways, the backdrop of what she was doing was really challenging for
Mm,
her, but she had purposefully carved out this very precious space for herself. That has always stuck with me, that idea that it does depend on lots of things, opportunities, and lots of factors. Maybe there are other ways of doing things. I've got this sort of framework I use, which is like play, pause, stop. And often that pause list is really long. It's like, not yet. For some reason, whatever it is, not yet,
mm.
but don't let it drop off the list. Let it just kind of be there, and see if there is a time that it can drop into your press play on that idea.
Yeah, I
Mm.
really, really like that idea. We
Mm.
are, especially as creatives, we have so many ideas all the time.
Yeah, and what you mentioned, I think, is so interesting about needing it to be sort of modeled, because again, for some of us, we may have come from backgrounds where work was very functional. In my case, my parents were both in the military for a time. Work was I didn't know that many people who
Mm,
had self-employment or who ran their own businesses. I knew some, but not many. And it always seemed like really hard work and bit thankless, in some ways, and they were just always on, and
yeah,
that was sort of in the 80s, 80s, 90s. And now we do live in a different climate. So it's kind of being responsive to what's possible. And for many listening to this, they might not be full time doing what they want to do. What is full time really? Are we thinking of like a 40-hour work week? So yeah, there's lots of questions still around those issues that I think, as even as a wider society, we're kind of working out,
yeah,
what
definitely.
constitutes work, what constitutes the working week. Lots of those questions are up in the air, I think.
And I think even if you're not considering as a business, if you're listening
Yeah,
and it's just something that you enjoy doing, there's also that side of it as well, isn't there?
yeah, yeah,
You're
totally.
taking the time for something that you enjoy and not feeling guilty. I think
Yeah,
I struggled with
definitely.
that a long time.
Yeah, that's where I'm at, I would say. Yeah, doing it just because. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think it's so important, it
Mm.
really is. I had Gabriel Lipper on the podcast a few weeks ago, and he was saying, we were talking about his upcoming course, which I took. It was absolutely incredible. And we were saying about how, we feel guilty for spending money on something like that maybe necessarily we won't get back, or
Mhm.
how can we show that that's been worthwhile spending the investment on. And he was saying a lot of parents would take their children to ballet or drama or piano lessons or guitar lessons or any of these things, football training, all those things you have to pay for. You never once say, oh, well, what's my return on investment going to be on those? Are you going to be a
Mm.
footballer? Are you going to be a successful musician, a singer? No, we allow them to have their hobbies, their enjoyment, their play, because it's
Yeah,
all part of their experience. But
yeah.
yet, as we get older, we don't allow ourselves the same. So I think
Mm.
I loved having that conversation and bringing that to people's attention, because we do feel guilty and it is
Yeah,
really hard to take that time when you have so many other responsibilities, whether
yeah,
you're a parent or not.
yeah,
It doesn't matter. As an adult, we have that many responsibilities. It's very difficult to
yeah,
spend the money on ourselves if we don't
yeah.
think it's it's going to impact maybe our business, but it's so important.
And it's funny, that word responsibility, because actually we're most responsible for ourselves. And if we are making ourselves mentally, emotionally, physically healthier by pursuing creativity, isn't that being the most responsible we could be?
Absolutely. Yeah, 100%. I think that is such a lovely place to wrap up, because I want to leave people with that thought. That is, go off now and spend some time. I know I have a listener who often tells me that she listens to a lot of podcasts, but for mine, she always, if she's doing things, she'll have them on, but she will always make sure that she sits and she just listens, because she wants to give it the time. And I always think I appreciate that so much. I try and do that now for other ones that I'm listening to, actually just give it my full attention, because how often do we just sit and I don't sit and read a book. I struggle with that so much. It is really lovely to be able to do that. And then in my affirmation episodes, I often will say, just give yourselves 2-3 minutes, just sit down, listen to these, and just give yourself that time, because we just don't take it and we need it.
We need it. Attention, where you put your attention, it's very important. Thank you so much, Liz, for the chat.
It's been so lovely having you on, and thank you for sharing your wisdom with us. Thank you for spending this time with me on Empowering the Artist Within. I hope today's conversation with Jo McCarthy has gently nurtured your creative spirit and left you feeling inspired, supported, and more confident in your unique journey. If this episode resonated with you, I'd be so grateful if you subscribed, left a review, or shared it with someone who might need a little encouragement today. Your support truly means the world and helps this podcast reach more creatives, artists, and sensitive souls. You're always welcome to connect with me on Instagram at Empowering the Artist Within. I love hearing your stories and reflections. Until next time, keep creating, keep exploring, and most of all, keep believing in yourself.